Alright, hello, and welcome to the second video blog of toothsoup. I had a lot of fun making that first video, rambling on and telling people what I've been up to with my life. I thought that I would actually try and put together a series of video posts about books that I've read, because I have a lot of trouble when people ask me for book recommendations, actually giving them some. So I figured if I review every book that I read this year, then hopefully I'll be able to just recommend people come to my blog so they can see my opinions without me having to try and remember exactly which books I like. So yeah, I'm kind of substituting videos for my memory so that I can free up space, defrag, I guess. Anyway, so the first book that I've read for this series is called JPod, and it's by Douglas Coupland. It's got a shiny title, so there we go. You can see it, Douglas Coupland, JPod, yay. It's kind of a funny book. It's written very much in a journal type style about the narrator Ethan and his co-workers who work at a game design firm. And essentially it's non-stop hijinks all the way through. His mum is involved in a grow-up, growing marijuana plants in her basement. His father, I should say, is a retired, got fired, I think, or is a retired ballroom champion and aspiring actor. All his co-workers are either sex-crazed, depraved, being brought up in lesbian communes, or associated with people of dubious business practices. His brother is a real estate agent who is linked to the Chinese underworld, immigration. So yeah, it's pretty full on. There's not too many chapters or sections in the book where something ridiculous isn't happening. And I guess that is kind of what disappointed me about it, because the only other novel that I actually read of Coupland's is Microserfs, which is written. The two novels could literally just go back to back, because it is pretty much the exact same style of writing. It's the exact sort of same journalistic, kind of filled with weird little things in there, like pages and pages of numbers and stuff like that. It's written like somebody who is just sort of jotting down their everyday thoughts. It's essentially a blog in a book. You got all this sort of random stuff that the character is thinking about all the way through. Little challenges that they set each other as co-workers to write eBay listings of themselves and stuff like that, and whoever wins gets these ridiculous prizes. Yeah, as I said, it kind of disappointed me because Microserfs, which is the book that this is described as being a spiritual successor to, that was written in 1996 and was kind of quite well received because it was set in this really, really interesting period where Microsoft was, an absolute giant. I mean, I think it was in the 1990s when Microsoft was really starting to push into being this massive company just before the dot-com bubble burst. So it's this really interesting thing about in Microserfs, it's still a group of coders. So it's like the parallels are obvious. Like it's pretty much the two novels, as I said, could be back to back. They're so similar. It's kind of like in Microserfs you've got this underlying philosophy of you've got sort of working for the man, working for this feudalistic Bill Gates as king and all the rest of us as serfs, hence the title Microserfs. And they leave that system to go and work on what they call their version 1.0, where they're actually part of this startup for a game called OOP, with the exclamation mark. Which actually, when I was reading it's uncannily similar to Minecraft, which is a recent viral video game success, in that the game that they're describing is kind of like this Lego type, you can build anything kind of design game, but it sounds more like, I suppose, AutoCAD versus Minecraft's very pixelated, blocky sort of thing. But anyway, yeah, the Microserfs, it just seems more interesting in terms of there's a very strong theme that's being presented in getting away from the office job, whereas in JPod, the workers pretty much stay there up until the end of the... pretty much, I think, the last possibly 10 pages, I think they leave the company to actually join a startup created by Douglas Coupland. And I know that sounds weird, and it is completely meta. Douglas Coupland is in the novel, which is kind of one of the reasons why it just felt like a novel that someone would write if they were asked to write a Douglas Coupland novel, and not Douglas Coupland actually writing a novel himself. It seems as though he's gone, right, it's 2005, I need to push out another novel. I haven't written something like Microserfs for a while, how about I do it for a new generation? Unfortunately, the new generation is really, really boring, and I'm kind of ashamed to be a part of it if this is the kind of stuff that they're talking about. While it is entertaining, there's just not that three-dimensional characters that really help Microserfs be a really enjoyable reading experience. And maybe I am being a little bit harsh on it, because the only two novels of Coupland's I've read are Microserfs and JPod. And Microserfs, there was just... The narrator had a lot more depth to him, because he was... there was sort of a running thing about his brother who had been killed in a boating accident. And his... Just in general, I mean, if you're going to write a novel that's essentially a blog and is essentially the character advice or writing about the everyday thoughts and feelings and events that are happening to him, you've got to make it... You've got to be able to engage with the character. And it seemed as though in JPod, Coupland was kind of making up for the lack of internal depth with the characters with just all these ridiculous hijinks that these characters go on. I mean, I think Ethan ends up going to China to look for his boss, who has a crush on his mum, but his mum is friends with a Chinese drug lord who kidnaps Ethan's boss and sends him to China to be a worker on the assembly line, putting together Nikes and addicting him to heroin. And Ethan only gets out of China after rescuing Steve by being rescued by Douglas Coupland himself, again. So it's kind of... It really does seem like he's making up for the fact that the internals of this character are just nowhere near as interesting as the internals of the main character in Microserfs. So yeah, I don't know. There's just like, I mean, to give you an example of the kind of thing that kind of made me go, that's, it's fun, but also really, like, I showed this page a little bit earlier, but here's the start of what was a string of first pi numbers. Sorry, to go high up. First pi numbers, and then there's a little interlude where the characters win the prize for identifying the wrong number in pi. And then there's another string of like 10,000 random numbers. And this goes on for something like 50 pages of the novel is just numbers. And you just got to sit there and go, well, the payoff for something like that, in terms of humour, is not worth 50 pages of fucking trees. I'm sorry, but that's just the way I feel about it. I'm coming off really harsh on this book. It was really enjoyable, okay? I've got to say, as far as light entertainment goes, brilliant. I read it on the train in, I think, maybe 4 days. So it wasn't, it wasn't that bad. It was quite easy to get through. But having only, like, a few weeks ago, I think maybe a month ago max, read Microserfs and enjoyed it so much for the characters' individual thoughts and interesting views on the world, and, like, this quite introspective analysis of himself and also his relation to Microsoft, and coming to terms with the fact that he'd rather be doing something new and interesting and for himself rather than working for somebody else. I just found JPod to be, I don't know, indicative of the age it's written in, I guess. It's kind of superficially interesting, but when you kind of think about how deep you're getting into these characters' lives, it's nowhere near as good, and nowhere near as deep. So I don't know. Get it if you want a quick read, but I would much more strongly suggest getting Microserfs than JPod. But yeah, so there you go. First read of the review series. Douglas Coupland's JPod. Pick it up after you've read Microserfs, if you kind of just want the same thing to read again, but not as interesting. Cool. Catch you guys later.